to pass this mic to a very special lady that she reaches out to students and to the world because she is very unusual. And look at her shoes. Did you notice her shoes? Stand up, Raina. Do you notice? And what she has to say is more important than anything that I can say to you. She is brilliant. And my friend.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello. So, my name is Raina Rose, and I want to tell you a little bit about my grandparents. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They're not around anymore. If they were, they'd be over 110 years old. Yeah, so they passed away when I was much younger. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my grandparents. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life, and then I want to just talk about where do we go from here? What do we do with all these lessons and information that we learn? So give me a thumbs up if you're with me. Excellent. So my grandparents lived in Poland. My grandfather, when he was growing up, his family, they lived on a farm, right? And he was the older sibling. But when my grandfather got older, his parents, my great-great-grandparents, realized if they wanted my poppy to have a better education, they would have to leave the country, right? They have to leave the rural area and move into the city where the schools were better. And when my grandfather was in high school, back then, you used to have to pick what you wanted to study. My grandpa wanted to study physics. But do you know what? They had a quota. Only a certain amount of Jews could go into the physics class, could go into the accounting class. You see, the Holocaust didn't just happen. People were being separated and discriminated against before the Holocaust happened. So my grandfather only took accounting when he was a teenager because that was the only option he had to study. Okay? So everybody up here, when they were speaking to you, they were a young child when the Holocaust broke out. My grandfather was in his 20s, and him and my grandma had just started dating, okay? My grandmother worked for a Russian bank. You remember you heard Zelda talk about Russia?
Yes. Yeah.
So, get this. My grandma and grandpa had only been out on 2 or 3 dates. And when my grandma went to work one day at the bank, the manager of the bank said, Hitler is coming. He's invading. And we can save all the employees and their immediate family. So my grandmother said to my grandfather, marry me and I'll save you. And that's how my grandfather and my grandmother got out of Poland. They were on the run. They ended up in Russia working in a labor camp where they were able to pass as not being Jewish. But after the Holocaust ended and they went back to Poland to see what was left of their family, imagine, the Holocaust is over. You think you can go home? You go home and someone else is living there. Some people went back to their homes and were murdered in their homes by the people who moved in while they were out. When I learned my grandparents went back to Poland and didn't die, I was like, oh my God. My grandfather said they can put you in jail, they can take away your rights, they can take away your home, but they will never take away your education. My grandfather spoke 7 languages. What class did I tell you he took in high school? No, he wanted to take physics. Accounting. Now imagine, he only took accounting because that was the only option he had in school. You remember when Zelda mentioned displaced persons camps? Well, when the war ended, it wasn't like, let me just go back home. The Jewish people didn't have homes to go to. The displaced persons camps were places where Jewish people could live until they were able to immigrate somewhere else to become a citizen. In those DP camps, they taught them skills so that when you moved, you could become a carpenter, you could become a seamstress. So get this, when they're putting up the DP camps in Europe, my grandfather met a man from the American military. His name was General Pritchard. And he said to my grandfather, I'm heading this DP camp. You know accounting. You speak 7 languages. Let's put you as a manager in charge of the DP camp. Because imagine the trauma that the Jewish people just went through, and now you're going to put an American in charge? So I don't know this for sure, but I've been told that my grandfather was the first Jewish person who was put in charge of a DP camp. My uncle Felix was the last Exelbeard born in Europe. He was born in that DP camp. And then my grandfather made it his mission that it wasn't until everybody was out of his DP camp, they weren't immigrating to America until then. My grandparents came to America broke and homeless. They moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Somebody thought they were veterans. They put them in an apartment, and 2 weeks later, they were back on the street. They said, you're not a veteran. We're not going to give you this apartment. My dad was born 10 years later in America. When my Uncle Felix was growing up, he had to go to the army to pay for his college. He didn't get new clothes. But by the time my father was born, my grandparents achieved the American dream. My father got a car. My father got his college paid for. And something else that I want to mention about Memphis, Tennessee, who's a very famous civil rights leader that we know about in connection to Memphis, Tennessee? I know you know because I saw a beautiful picture of him downstairs. Martin Luther King. Oh. Now listen to this. Listen to this, because this is really important. You know, what was one of the first steps in the Holocaust? Jews had to put on a yellow star. Now imagine this. My grandparents have survived the Holocaust. They're in Memphis, Tennessee. They see segregation and see color on a bathroom, color on a water fountain. So you have to imagine, for the Jewish community, coming from yellow stars to now seeing things being labeled as colored. Jewish people and black people marched together for civil rights in this country. When you get a job and there's a statement that says we do not discriminate based off of sex, gender, race, or religion, that was written by black and Jewish activists together. So it's so important to understand that we are stronger together, okay? So I talked about my grandparents. I talked about my family situation. Growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, I never experienced racism a day in my life. But get this. When I went to college, I moved to Boca Raton. Boca Raton is a city that has more Jews than the entire state of Tennessee. And that's where I experienced anti-Semitism for the first time. People put an eviction notice on my dorm. They bullied me for being Jewish, and at my college, they brought in speakers who said the Holocaust never happened. What would you do? Well, guess what? Guess what? Those people who bullied me inspired me to learn my family's story. And since college, I have personally spoken to over 250,000 people, mostly teenagers, about the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism, and leadership. So don't you dare ever tell yourself you're not smart enough or that you're not ready enough. Because if you have the will and the determination and you are willing to ask other people for help, you can change the world. Now, I'm sorry to tell you that there has never been more anti-Semitism in my lifetime than there is right now. And that's where you come in. You have to speak up. If you see somebody in the hallway getting bullied, you need to speak up for that person. If you see that somebody's being treated unfairly and you don't want to be seen speaking up in front of someone, go tell your teacher or your guidance counselor. You have the ability to change the world. And the stories from that time will only continue if you share them. The last thing I want to share with you all, because this is just like a really crazy story. So Anya and I were good friends. As you heard, we went bowling on her birthday. It was crazy. So, Anya and I, through my volunteer work, we used to go out together. We used to hang out. And then a couple of years ago, we said, let's go on a speaking tour together. So Anya and I, we went to the FBI. We went to all these colleges, all these elementary schools. It's like reading Rainbow. So we're in Tennessee. It's Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I had tragically lost my dad 3 years before that. And this was my first Holocaust remembrance after COVID without my dad. So Anya and I are in Knoxville, Tennessee. It is a small town. We are in the only synagogue in Knoxville. All of a sudden, Anya starts reading this short biography about my grandpa. The dude who I told you who ran the DP camp, right? Well, Anya looks at my grandfather's bio and goes, Bavaria. She goes, I was there. And she starts laughing. I start crying. I'm like, what do you mean you were there? She goes, I was at this DP camp. And I'm like, I don't believe this. I think it's my dad saying, I don't believe this. We go back to Memphis, Tennessee. I have a book my grandfather had from the DP camp. Sure enough, found a picture of her stepdad in the book. She's looking at the pictures and everything looks, very familiar. So it's almost like we were meant to be friends. The last message I want to end on is use your skills and gifts for the right thing. You heard Zelda mention about righteous Gentiles, righteous among the nations. So Israel put out an application and said, if you were someone who helped save Jews during the Holocaust, fill out this application, and if you did save Jews, we'll send you some money, and we're going to put your name in this museum. So people would fill out the applications, right? And I'll never forget, I'm in the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and I'm talking to the tour guide, and he says to me, this righteous Gentile, his occupation, right? Because you got to put your name, your job, what you did. The guy put thief. Thief? I was like, tell me more, right? And he said this thief was one of the most notorious thieves in the town that he lived in. And when the Holocaust happened, there were some Jewish families who approached him and said, we know you're the biggest thief. We know you know all the hiding spots. Please, will you hide us? And this thief hid these families underground for over 1.5 years. Some of the Jewish people left underground because they couldn't handle being in the sewers. They were murdered. And for 1.5 years, the thief brought them food and even stole a prayer book for them. Now, why am I telling you this? Because Hitler employed some of the most brilliant, smartest people. You had doctors and surgeons who were doing the most inhumane experiments you could imagine. I won't tell you the really nasty stuff, but They would throw Jews in the water in uniform to be like, how long would it take the Nazis to get hypothermia if they were wearing these uniforms? And the Holocaust was such a complicated time that a thief was a righteous Gentile and a doctor was a monster. You get to make the choice in your life what you do with your gifts and your connections, and most importantly, use your gifts for the right thing and pay attention in school, because you never know when those lessons will come in your future to either help you, like it did my grandpa, or it might put you at a disadvantage. Take advantage of all the opportunities that you have, because as you heard from my friends up here, they did not grow up with those same opportunities. Anya ate sunflower seeds for 3 months. Her first photo she has from her life, she's 16 years old. We spoke to first and second graders 2 weeks ago. They were fascinated that she had an outdoor toilet. Back then in Russia, the toilet had 5 holes and there were no stalls. So if you got a bathroom, you got a family who cares about you, and you have food in the lunchbox, it might not be what you want now, but you can design the life, your dreams, and you can make your life what you want it to be. Because when one grows, we all grow. Thank you very much.